Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be joined today by Nezar Kadhem, the founder of EatApp, an industry-leading restaurant reservation and table management platform, servicing hotels and restaurants in more than 40 countries worldwide. EatApp has raised more than $8 million, has a team of about 50 people, and has seated more than 20 million guests to date. I'm sure now the numbers are a bit higher, but maybe roughly there. Nezar is also a board member at the Seal Group, a real estate development company, and co-founder at Soundscapes, a music and arts festival in the Middle East. And now I guess you're kind of expanding beyond. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Fahad. Real pleasure, and appreciate the invite, and I look forward to our chat.
Awesome. So what I like to do with these conversations is kind of dive into who you are today, what makes you the person who you are. And to help do that, I think it helps to go back, try to understand, your background and how you became who you are today. How do you think your mother would describe you as a child?
It's a good question. I had a bumpy road with my parents growing up. I had an older brother, a younger sister, but most of my childhood, early teenage years, I'd spent with my brother. And we weren't particularly calm. We were very active. I had a lot of fights. And so my mom, and to this date, she keeps recollecting the past, that I was a very active kid, spontaneous, shaitan in the Arabic. I don't know how you would
literally translated to devil, but
the devil.
I think not as extreme. It sounds more extreme in English.
Right. And I think that's how my mom would describe it. But in her eyes, a lot of things changed, right? I became a lot more calm now. But my early beginnings were a bit shaky with my parents. That's how I think she would describe me historically. Now, I think she has a lot more, it's a lot more of a calmer perspective. And she's a huge supporter and advocate of all the things that we're doing.
Can she relate to what you're doing now? Like the space you're in, the world you're in?
Very much so. I was impressed with the quality of conversations you can have with your parents about all subjects. And they relate to many stories and experiences related to, some of the common threads, right? Yeah. So when I talk about EatApp, I talk about the challenges of working hard, or the challenges of dealing with people, or customers, and so she relates to those common threads.
Very universal themes.
Yeah. The realization is that a lot of people face the same challenges, but it's just different circumstances, different countries. I do have very rich conversations with my parents.
Beautiful.
But it's important to find that common thread that they can relate to. Right? I wouldn't be able to talk about like a product-led decision or which DJ to book at Soundscapes. But I find a lot of insight and value in spending time and communicating with my parents. I don't do it as often. I feel that in general the projects create a lot of distance between my close friends and family in general, just because I'm so occupied. But when I do have the opportunity, I find that there's depth there.
And what were you doing as a kid that other kids weren't doing?
Oh, that's a good one. There's a few. I mean, I think I can relate to perhaps the later stages of my childhood, maybe the teenage years and closer to when I graduated high school. First, I think music was paramount in my family in general. My dad had purchased these Bose speakers at home, and my dad was a huge Pink Floyd fan, Cat Stevens fan. So, music was a rather deeply integrated cultural thing at home. And so I'd say one of the things is that, and I reflect back and I'm like, did we really do that? But I think we spent, hours and hours and hours just driving around in the car and listening to music. And at the time, this is back in 2004, 2005, maybe. Electronic music was now coming into CDs. Some of the cars had CD players. And so we'd just drive around for hours doing nothing, saying nothing, just listening to music. So I'd say that's one. Aside from that, I was, buying and selling motorbikes. And this is like, like I was 15, maybe 16. My parents, I didn't have a license to drive them. But back then there were like, all these like street kids in Bahrain, and they were like selling bikes for, today 30, 40 BDs. It's about $100 to buy a bike. And so I'd buy them, we'd take them, break them apart, polish them, paint them, resell them. And my parents never knew, because I always hid the bikes in like the back area of my house, until one day like I'd bought a bike, I sold it. Obviously there's no refund policy, right? So like the bike broke, and then these people came back looking for me, and actually went to jail once too. When I was they couldn't jail me because I was too young, but I got caught with driving the bike, no license, no helmet or whatever. So there's plenty of those stories. Wow. But I'd say that definitely was unique. Like no other kids were doing some of this stuff.
That's pretty cool. How did you get into that even? Were there people around you in that scene, and kind of you saw this opportunity of like, okay, this could be an interesting way to make money on the side?
Yeah, I think, I suppose there was a dirt track behind my house. Maybe it by the freeway, going to Saudi on the right. There's like a
yes.
So that's very close to my house.
Nice.
It's literally backyard. So I was always, whenever we'd go out for a walk or whatever, there'd always be bikes there.
That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. But my parents never wanted. It was too dangerous to buy a bike, and I was like, okay, well, let's figure out a way to get this done without asking for permission. And I think that's kind of how it started.
Nice. With I feel like with as you go through life, there are certain decisions you make that end up defining who you are, playing a big role in like shaping the person you end up becoming. Mm-hmm. From the outside, I think looking at you, one of those decisions is choosing to become a startup founder. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's something that shaped a big part of your identity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the decisions that was a major determinant of the future to this day was deciding where to go to school. Mm-hmm. So maybe for the folks who are not from the region, like if you gone to a school in the region, you speak English, and your parents can support you in going to university. The common suspects were the US, the UK, Australia, for most. And I recall basing this decision on music. I remember I was so, deeply in love with music, electronic music to be particular, that I remember not picking university based on the programs they offered, but I remember looking at the US. The reason the US was because my brother studied in the UK, my other cousins studied in Miami, and in high school with my parents, we'd travel to visit my brother and visit them, and I just felt a lot more connected to the US. And then that led to the research of the best electronic music scene in the US, and at that point it was San Francisco. This is back in 05, 06. So that led to the decision to move to San Francisco. And I feel like that was the single most life-changing decision, to move to San Francisco, because from there the tech thing happened, and from that the startup thing happened, and et cetera, et cetera. So I would say if I had to look back at a single decision that shaped the trajectory, I would say that, deciding where to move for university, it shaped a lot of decisions and paths thereafter.
What was the sort of immediate impact that being in San Francisco had? How did it like sort of change your trajectory?
So almost immediately, I was thrown in the deep end because, and I'm sure you know this, there's some within the common suspects, the US, the UK, and Canada, there are also common suspects in terms of cities, right? And so you'll have Boston, which had a high concentration. Within the UK, you had London or Newcastle, et cetera. And so there was no one in San Francisco. There was a few people that...
You didn't have like a bubble of Arabs.
No, there was none of that, right? And so, exactly. So as such, you get thrown in the deep end and you immediately start, being introduced to people from very different backgrounds. And yeah, then that's kind of how the introduction of San Francisco was. It's like, this is the almost polar opposite of the region. It's like the most open, liberated society, most forward-thinking, most creative, and I was 17 when I moved there. I graduated 6 months early. At least I was like I'm born December 31st, and so I made it to the cut, and like I'm the last possible day to make it in the cut of my cohort at high school, and so I graduated 6 months earlier. But yeah, to be 17 and to be in San Francisco, and no other close friends or relatives living there, that was a very, very sort of culturally disruptive experience. And as a result of that, you have to learn to just become independent and kind of integrate within society. And yeah, you get thrown in the deep end and you have to figure things out as you go.
Yeah, I can totally relate. A friend of mine asked me, what's a uncomfortable experience that you'd recommend to others? And it's definitely what you just mentioned, like being thrown into the deep end. Mm-hmm. I'd say like moving to a different country on your own. You learn a lot trying to just find your way.
For sure.
When you're just out there on your own, a new place, everything's kind of unfamiliar.
Right.
And
especially after being nested throughout your whole life, right? Like for most, you live with your parents, right? Up until high school. And so the magnitude of that experience is enormous, because for the first time you're living on your own, you're taking care of yourself on your own. I'm saying for the vast majority, there are people who are independent from very early on in life, but for the vast majority, you're independent for the first time. And there's all that, the inheritance of the people the family, like you, in many cases, haven't selected the people that you got to spend time with. Maybe it's because of school that you met a few people, or it's your cousins, and so all of a sudden you gravitate towards a preference that you might have not know exist, right? And so then the friends you end up making, or the colleagues, or maybe life partners you end up meeting, it's organic in many ways, right? And then you start to understand yourself. You're like, so this is maybe my preference or my likes, or so absolutely, I think it's such an important experience. But having said that, it's not readily available to everyone, right? And so, you have to be grateful to have been given that opportunity.
Absolutely. But I think even if it's not an option to go and study abroad, I think you could pursue careers abroad. You could try to find ways to spend more time in different locations. I think that's maybe a more like affordable option.
For sure. Yes.
Or
traveling, or like saving up to travel, and just getting out there. I think the lessons you learn by just exposing yourself to different scenarios, and you'll come to learn that like every country and every society, they share there's a common thread in many things, but the way that they perceive certain cultural elements, or it's just so interesting to learn and see how people in, say, Moscow behave in a specific scenario, or people in our region, or people in the US, and then you start to like connect the dots, and you begin to appreciate the way that like this culture does things, and it just makes you a much more rounded person. So in general, I think obviously being able to travel and live abroad is one thing, but traveling in general, I think, is highly, highly recommended. And you can see that too, right? You go home and you might meet people who have been stationed there for too long. And there's a gap, right? And like the ability, the capacity of your mind to be able to think about certain things. So traveling is very important.
Also, it helps you question a lot of sometimes you just adopt, like you said, you adopt beliefs or frameworks unconsciously. Then traveling suddenly, oh wait, there's a different way of thinking about this or doing this.
Right.
So aside from your motorbike wheeling and dealing venture, what was the next like sort of entrepreneurial idea that came to mind?
There was a lot. There's a lot of side hustles that just continued happening throughout the years. In San Francisco, I was given just the bare minimum and it was an expensive city, and I'm very grateful that my family was able to support it. But they gave me the bare minimum to survive, and but then like 2 years later, my dad came and I had this like massive flat screen TV, a PlayStation, an Xbox, all this new IKEA furniture. And he was like, how much? But I thought I paid just enough. Like, how were you able to afford this? So yeah, I felt like I learned a lot from my dad, and he had taken us on a lot of business trips with him in the past. My dad's I'd say serial entrepreneur in many definitions. He founded a retail business to sell jewelry. He was an advisor to the Omani government, helping them source a lot of materials as needed. He was a real estate developer. He supported a farming business. Like, he was involved in many different trades. And growing up, I think I'd learned a lot just on how to speak to people and how to conduct business, how to negotiate. And so it took that side hustle. The motorbike thing was one thing, but I did many little things like that throughout the years. But I'd say the biggest sort of entrepreneurial adventures, the formal ones, all happened after university. Throughout university, I just spent some time just doing side hustles. I picked up some gigs. I worked as an employee at a few different restaurants and retail gigs, etc. Just some side things throughout the years, but nothing formal up until end of university.
Yeah, I just want to say I had the pleasure of meeting your dad a few times, and his energy, his love for life is just amazing. In some sense, and it feels strange saying this, but he feels like he has the heart of a child. Like, he's just just loves life, very energetic. So nice to be around.
Yeah, I think and I love hearing that also from, because I share the exact same perspective on my dad. And I think he said it recently. He came to visit. I was in Poland this summer, and I told him, you have to come out. You have to come and explore the forest in Europe in August. You'll really love it. And it was like slightly more difficult with the pandemic, but like the next day he calls me. He's like, I'm on a flight. I'm coming. Wow. And then we went out for a swim in the lake, and he felt so good. And he just mentioned something that I found super fascinating. He said, because I feel this way now, right? I've always felt better than I have before, right? Like, every single year I feel like we're making progress, we're building, we're improving on a mental capacity. Things are becoming clearer, and on various capacities. Obviously there are hiccups and bumps in the road, but overall the trajectory is upwards. And he told me that in his 20s he felt that he was, at the peak of his, life and all aspects.
Can't get better than this.
Can't get better. Then he had the same conclusion in his 30s, and he's like, "Oh, I had no idea in my 20s." And then when he got to his 40s, he's like, "Well, the 40s are the best time in your life." And then when he got to his 50s, he's like, "Hold on a second, this is the best time." And then as he was walking, he's like, "But now it's my favorite time." And my dad's in his mid 60s, right? And so he's always had that in mind, that I'm extremely grateful to be alive, and you're always happy, right? You're always content. You're always happy to say, this may sound a bit dark, but you're always happy to say, if I go right now, I'm good. Like I'm happy, I'm content, and
I had a great time.
I had a great time, And so he's never stopped believing in that, and I think that is in many ways portrayed not only in his language, but in the vibe and in his energy and his smile, and I look up to that, and I want to continue always believing in that, and I think it's a very positive way to live, and as a result, his vibe comes out of that. He was there in Zanzibar too for Soundscapes. He just showed up. Yeah, that's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I've never talked to him about anything like this, but it's not something that needs to be said. You just feel it instantly. Right. Yeah, which is really, it's powerful. How when you think of, you have a certain outlook on life, it's how it's communicated to others. It's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, it's so true, right? Like I think you have to, you just have to stay positive, right? You always have to think that, everything led to this point. You have to trust that the decisions you took were the best at the time. Whether they had succeeded or failed, they taught you lessons or they moved you forward. You always have to be content, right? And it just establishes the state of peace that I think is extremely important, because it keeps you optimistic, even at times of difficulty, right? Yeah. So to become an entrepreneur, I feel like that's a very important trait. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. What you're going through your sort of days in San Francisco, hustling on the side, studying. When did I guess EatApp was that the first formal kind of venture you decided to? No.
So I'll give you.
Or was it Soundscapes? I don't know. Go ahead.
I'll tell you a little bit of the early beginnings. So San Francisco, there's a lot happened in San Francisco. First, the music thing was true, right? Like the art, music, culture on the West Coast, but more particularly in San Francisco, more particularly electronic music. And a lot of those CDs I spoke about, there were records that were being sold in San Francisco that were never available elsewhere. And I just remember every trip I came back to Bahrain, I was bringing those records, and I was like showing my friends like music that was so ahead of its time. And so musically, San Francisco just like elevated like that creative element. And then separate to that, the whole tech thing, right? Because in 2007, the iPhone launched. I moved to San Francisco in 2006.
Oh, wow.
So about 12 months in, the iPhone launches, right? So, I remember, we bought the first iPhone like on the day it launched. We went to sleep outside the Apple store, picked up that phone, and but it was a lot more powerful than I assumed. Not the phone itself, but the impact on the ecosystem, because then it was the tech enabler to allow instant access to, all sorts of services. And I remember many friends, one friend in particular, this must have been like 6 months after the iPhone launches. We're in school. I know the guy from different classes that we shared, and he's showing me this, this platform that they're building. It's like a photography. It's like an Instagram before Instagram, basically. And he was raising money, and I was like, dude, this guy's a student. What does it mean to raise money, launch a company? And the more the time passed, the more examples that I saw, and it was just like a destined thing, like tech, startups, and I understood it. It was like, it wasn't foreign to me. It was like, And if you live in San Francisco, you have to be extremely techy, right? And this is like iPhone users in 2007, 8, 9. And by the way, my dad, like, maybe side story, but like when I told him we're sleeping outside the store to pick up this phone, he was like, all right, can you buy me one? And I remember I had to like jailbreak it, bring it back to Bahrain. And he was like one of the first people in Bahrain who had an iPhone. And so it was, there was like a calling. It was like, okay, this feels like the natural thing to pursue. You know, and obviously you are influenced by your environment, and San Francisco, you know, like the professors too. That I went to San Francisco State, which is like the Cal State University system, and we had, you know, Stanford nearby, UC Berkeley nearby, all the schools nearby, and so a lot of the professors would rotate, and they would take classes for State just to be able to like give back. And so a lot of the professors I had were also Stanford professors, and a lot of the subjects was about tech. And sort of shaping like what the future to come. So it was clear that tech was the next thing, and then I couldn't explain it to my parents at that point, and my mom was like, yeah, you should like, you know, typical Arab family, like you should maybe get into like finance or get into banking or whatever. And I was like, I'm not doing any of that. This is the path that I feel more like I feel like there's a strong calling. And but I still didn't feel ready. Like I felt like his name is Michael Perry, and you can look him up because he ended up launching numerous companies, got acquired by Shopify, became a senior director, and now launched another company. The guy's on fire. I mean, it's like nonstop to this day. And I remember like his first startup at school. But I still felt that it was not fully baked in my head. Like how, what is the first step? What do we need to do? And so I recall there was a university that was like promoting, you know, all over San Francisco, Babson. It was like the #1 entrepreneurship school in the US at the time. At least that's what they advertised. And I, in many ways, believe that is true. And they had a master's program in entrepreneurship, and the idea was that they would coach you on how to launch a company, and then you would live in France for like 4 months, you'd live in China for 4 months, and you'd live in Boston for 4 months. That was the program. So I applied, luckily was accepted. It was kind of a side hustle to get accepted. I didn't have the GPA scores, but luckily got accepted, and then did that for about a year. And thereafter, you know, there was the drive, but now also the understanding on how to launch companies. And, you know, that's kind of where the first formal attempt at launching a company happened. And that was back in 2011. I moved to France. I moved to Paris. Because I had a girlfriend at the time whom I met in the US, and she was based there. And I moved there and, attempted the first startup, which lasted about 2 years or so. And that was, I would say, you know, because it was the first formal one, I had to like focus entirely on the startup. But again, the learning curve just continued to exponentially grow. But yeah, that would be the first formal one.
What was the idea?
So it was, believe it or not, it was very similar to EatApp. It was a SaaS CRM platform for event organizers. The reason that idea came up is because throughout our master's degree, we were encouraged to like meet other founders and like just continue to document problem spaces that we see around us, so that if ever we would launch a company, like we have a database of ideas. And
that's really cool.
And so we luckily met somebody, this serial entrepreneur in France, through an introduction of a friend, and he kind of talked to us about the space and how like underserved in tech the entire ecosystem is for events, nightclubs, any sort of events. Like there's no tech, there's no tooling, the prevalence of pen and paper, and you know, and mostly we used them as a testing bed. So we like worked very closely with his event organization to build the tooling. And so basically it was like a guest-facing, you know, event promotion tool. You can buy tickets, you can book, and then on the merchant side or the event side, you'd be able to get a guest list of all the people who bought tickets or are supposed to be on there. You check them in. Historically, this was an Excel exercise. Today, the event is huge. I mean, the space is huge with, Eventbrite, Resident Advisor, and so many tools that do this. So we attempted to do that back in 2011. But it was an epic failure because, we ended up, we just didn't focus on the right things at the right time. But throughout the whole thing, the entire thing was like an extension of the master's program. Just like I remember learning how to build like an iPad app. Okay, but how do you start? What do you have to do? What are the components required? So it's a very rich lesson on, the technical mechanics of launching a company and being able to verbalize some of that language and meeting prospect investors and like slowly beginning to like understand what it takes to build a company. I think that was the core success. The takeaway for sure.
Beautiful. And what happened next?
What happened next? What happened next was a person dearly, Hassan Haider. So in 2013-ish, I did a trip to Bahrain and I recall a friend of mine sent me a link to like this business angel group that's about to be founded in Bahrain. And so I reached out to Hassan. I think it was either on LinkedIn or something, and he agreed to meet up for coffee. And he was talking to me so he agreed to meet, and he was talking to me about how there's like no ecosystem in the region, and he was destined to like help build an ecosystem for startups, for investors. And so his initial approach was to launch a consortium, Tenmu basically, to bring in, a common pool of investors to begin deploying funds into startups. And he told me that would probably take shape, in the next 6 to 12 months, but we should stay in touch and I should consider the region. I am from the region. And also back then, like the lessons I've had from the previous startup on how to build tech, like Hassan knew that stuff because he had launched a company too, like his movie delivery service, et cetera. So there was a lot of, it was a rich and exciting conversation. And Hassan said, look, you decide to move back to the region, you decide to pursue an idea, let me know. I want to stay connected. Let's talk, right? And so kind of went back and a lot of the points that he'd mentioned just kind of sat there marinating in my head. And I remember one of the things he said was, the region has the highest number of, like the mobile penetration per user globally. We have the highest across the MENA region, and like, I don't know if that's true, but whatever he said, right, was very, very exciting. And so, and he's like, yeah, you're from the region, take advantage, come back, help us build, become the pioneer, call me when you're here, right? Like that's basically what he said. So I went back and it's kind of, at the tail end of that journey. And yeah, so then I moved back, agreed to move back and, worked very closely with Hassan to like build a testing bed for EatApp. And EatApp was many different ideas in the beginning. And separately, I was also together with a friend, like launching, to this day, it's kind of still running in the background, but like a Bitcoin discovery mining situation. We started super early. This was back in 2013, 2014. But that's kind of just a thing in the background. But that's
really early.
Yeah.
When was the white paper? When did that come out? Was it late 2000s?
Yeah, it was 2009-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, but 2013, like let's say October, Bitcoin was around $700. It hit 1,000 by December 2013. It hit that peak and then it crashed again. But we kind of entered around there. We imported a bunch of miners and we started buying Bitcoin. And to this day, this was a very important decision back then because in many ways, EatApp, it's a startup, right? So it cannot satisfy, a lot of the, let's say, desires or you want to be careful. You want to be able to like become financial, you want to be capital like your efficiency in the way you spend capital has to be spot on to not hurt your unit economics, etc. So I couldn't ask EatApp to pay for things, right? And so it was pleasant. It helped in many ways to just have some fallback. And maybe that's one thing is important in the podcast. Like for startup founders, right? Like I think it's very important to ensure that there's a baseline that you're comfortable with, so that you can give, your whatever passion project, whether it's a startup or even musicians. Like I've heard horror stories where like by pursuing music full time, they couldn't have adequate income, and so then there's like a love-hate relationship with the project itself.
Yes.
So by establishing some sort of baseline, that's very, very helpful, and which allows me to this day to continue running EatApp without having to think about that. But that was kind of the Hassan Haidar thing, and then EatApp came to life 2014-ish. But 2015, Q1 2015 is when we officially launched. That's kind of how that journey played out.
Wow. Did the idea of coming back to the Middle East, was that part of your plan, or did it seem appealing to you at the time? And after being abroad for so long, how did you feel coming back to the region?
It's a very good question. I think there was no plan. And there still isn't a plan. Really, like I think
just going with the flow.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
that's a nice way to live.
Yeah, I think that it's. I recall having those types of discussions. When are you coming home? Or
Right.
Or when I was home, are you like settling down or whatever? And it was like, no, let's just kind of go with it and see where this journey takes us, and we'll adapt, right? And we'll stay lean towards whatever the data tells us, right? Like the reason I moved to Dubai was because at the time, there was clear validation that we should come here. There's more VCs based here than elsewhere back then. All of the hospitality groups were based here. So it made it easy for us to do business, and then to recruit talent. There was more talent, more engineering here than anywhere else. And that was the reason I came, right? The reason I moved to Bahrain was because, Hassan. So it's just like kind of just going through this journey while, paying close attention to what the data tells us. And so, I felt like moving back just made sense. And I loved every moment of it. And it was a while, right? Like it was about... I moved away from the region in 2006, and I moved back in 2013, 2014. So about 8 years that I spent abroad. It was beautiful to come back, and I'm super happy with that decision. And in many ways, I felt like there's a greater mission here, right? Like we're building in the region, we're creating a platform to empower people. We're building technology to enable businesses to become more successful. Like there's a much larger impact in what we do here. So looking back, it was a great decision to come back.
Now maybe, and fast forwarding a bit to today, and looking back, EatApp's one of the handful of startups coming out of Bahrain that's reached a global scale. It's pretty amazing, looking at how things have evolved.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But I want to get a bit more, maybe dive a bit deeper, get a bit more technical. Looking at EatApp, maybe in the earlier days, you had a lot of potential revenue streams. B2C, B2B. B2B can be broken down into any different categories. How did you, what influenced the company's strategy? How did you come up with, did you try a bit of everything and see how the market responded? Did you have an idea of what was going to work? How did that kind of evolve over time?
So I think it sounds cliche to say this, but they say you got to speak to your customers, right? And so very early on, we built, together with one of the advisors, we were pitching EatApp to many different restaurant owners. He ended up becoming an advisor, and so alongside him, we built a sort of a round table with all the restaurant owners. We brought them together and we made a presentation. Look, like, this is what we're thinking. These are the problem areas we've uncovered from talking to you guys and your staff. These are the objectives and goals that you all have in common. This is how we can help. These are the potential revenue streams. This is how we want to charge. What do you think? Right? And so we had a very open panel, transparent panel, and almost in the very early days. And to this day, like, a lot of that that pricing business model remained true. And we talk to the customers, and we double click and come to the root cause, or we like uncover the problem space, and then we build solutions and find business models that justify solutions that will solve these problems, right? So and it's a clear ROI. And so we did it that way. We just asked them and we presented to them. And I remember it was like a negotiation almost, like, okay, like, this could be a range. How do you feel about this price point and that price point? And of course, you become a lot more intelligent as you grow. But in the very, very early days, that was the way that we built the model. Yeah.
I want to challenge what you said a bit. I think there's kind of any different ways of looking at this. One is like the Steve Jobs kind of approach, which is, I don't believe in market research. Customers don't know what they want until you give it to them.
Right.
Versus a very customer-centric approach where you're listening very intently to what a customer is saying or the feedback they're giving you. It seems like you're leaning quite heavily in this direction. Do you think? What do you think of that opposing view?
I think that in many ways, Apple is a heavily data-driven organization, right? Like, a lot of the decisions that they take is based on the abundance and richness of insights and user behavioral data. And they are at the cutting edge of being able to take and consume that data and then package it and launch. And they experiment and they fail in certain things. They succeed at many other things. But in the background, I think that Apple is a highly user-centric organization. And you see that in a lot of the decisions and the product iterations that they make. But I do agree, right? Like, I think if we were to blindly go and launch a product that, we knew in many ways we knew that this solution was needed, right? And so in a way that we will build it, they will come. We took that approach, and that's why you launched the company, right? But then it's very important to stress test every assumption that you have, right? My assumption is restaurants need X, Y, and Z. They will pay for X, Y, and Z. Great. Well, how can we package that into a very quick experiment? What is the easiest path to market to be able to validate that assumption and put something out? And so that was the thinking early on. But I agree with the Steve analogy, and I think that to this day we highly encourage that internally. Like, if somebody has an idea of a particular vertical product or a customer segment and a solution that they may need, we encourage that thinking, but we also want to make sure that you validate that thinking, right? Like, what data justifies this thinking, and what is the addressable opportunity? And we become almost like that's the lens you want to continue having as you continue to grow and scale. And so that holds true today as it did in the beginning. But yeah, I would say that you'd have to be customer centric, and then become a visionary, but use your customers to help trampoline you to that destination ultimately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So validating assumptions and setting up these experiments really stood out to me. I think it was I don't know, like 10 years ago, or no, maybe not that long ago, but maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, my father and I were planning to start this venture, and we came to you for some advice. And you said, there's this book, it's a startup Bible, you have to read this. It's called The Lean Startup.
Right.
And it talks about a lot of these principles that you just mentioned. How does the cycle go again? Was it like you have an assumption, you validate it, and then you reiterate? Or
Yeah, you have an assumption, you build a most minimal version of that, put that in the hands of your customers, get feedback, take that, bring it back to the assumption board, and you just continue doing that until it catches some sort of speed. But yeah, by Eric Ries, the Lean Startup, it's to this day, many of those principles hold true. And yeah, to anybody listening, like, you got to read that book. If you're considering launching a company, that's the Bible, as you said.
Yes. And it's, I think it's so easy to make assumptions about how the product's going to perform. But I think it's so crucial to go into this mindset of test, validate, make sure you're like, this is before you go all out and build, because it's going to take time, it's going to take resources. And if you're not, constantly following this, you're just going to end up making something that no one wants.
And the sad reality is the number of startups that launch with this great vision to do all these things, right? And so it's like living to the vision of Steve Jobs. It's like, we'll build it, they will come. And so you have like all of these, I can't begin to tell you how many founders had reached out and said, look, like, we built all this, what do you think? And I would say 10 out of 10, right? Like, every single one of those startups never ended up making it past the early stages, versus the ones that do are the ones that they build the bare minimum and stay very connected to a very specific customer group and make that customer group fall in love with the founders and the very beginnings of a product, and begin to iterate and improve and grow that community. Like, there's a particular way to launch a company that fundamentally changes your chances of success. And the book highlights that in a very basic way. And in my opinion, like, looking back at the first failure, the first company we launched, because we didn't really think about many of the principles of the Lean Startup. I remember we sat there for 4 months building this amazing analytics dashboard that would tell them, and it was all assumptions, right? And so then once we put the product out there, no one was using that page. And it was like, we just spent so much time building it, right? So how can you reverse that? And to this day, like, we're attempting now to transition into a product-led organization. And a product-led organization is one that continues to validate assumptions. You look at behavioral data, you look at customer insights, you look at customer support tickets, you aggregate as much intel, and you derive very specific conclusions. And from that, you can build experiments. And once you can establish that sort of flywheel internally, that's when you unlock the next layer of innovation, and you continue building products that people want and are happy to pay for. And that's kind of how you continue surviving, right? And so that's a very important piece, I think, in building anything, is to become customer-centric. And the whole Steve Jobs thing it's a dangerous analogy, because many people will say, no, but trust me, yes, I have the vision, and this app's going to do this, but it also does that and gets you to book this, but then you also get an Uber ride to do that. And it's like, it's amazing. But are people using this, right? And how many customers told you that this is a true pain point? This is a suffering that they're having, and this is why you're building these features. And there's not that many people that think like that. And that's what sets apart, 1 out of 10 companies, right? Like, I saw recently a timeline versus death matrix, and it's like, the number of companies that make it purely from an idea to like or seed, the cliff is so high, and then from seed to like Series A,
still pretty steep.
Super steep, yeah. Like, the percentage of companies that make it all the way to Series B was, I can't mention an exact number, and I don't want to be quoted here, but the large majority is like over 90% of companies never make it to Series B. So if you make it to Series B, that's amazing, right? You're already top 10
against
right?
the odds.
You're against the odds.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so then how do you beat that? Like, how do you elevate that line and make sure that the percentage is lower, right? And so adopting the lean methodology and the lean startup, can help many more companies survive, I think.
I'm really interested to hear your perspective on your role as a founder and CEO and how that's evolved over time. I feel like initially, you're hands-on, you're doing most of you're grinding, long hours, involved in pretty much everything. And then slowly, you shift towards focusing on building out the team. And then main focus is like hiring, fundraising, and your role keeps shifting.
Right.
I imagine. What's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, the evolution of a founder's role, and any early employee's role, I would say too, throughout the lifetime of any company, is impressively dynamic, because like the stuff that you do in the beginning and the stuff that you're doing now, and again, EatApp is like crossed almost exactly 7 years old now, right? So like in the 7 years, it's really hard to compare like the responsibilities we had in the beginning compared to now. But I would say that similar to the analogy we had earlier about coming back to the region and kind of just riding the wave, it's really, really important to ride the wave and just be very focused on doing things that require your attention at the time, that no one else has either the bandwidth or the knowledge to execute, right? And so you have to do whatever it takes at the time to ensure that your chances of success are at the highest possible level. While there's a common thread throughout, right? Your role as a founder is to continue to have a very clear idea and a vision on where the organization's headed. You have to continue to verbalize that vision. You have to continue to become an inspiration to many, to get them to join forces and believe in that vision and the reason why they do what they do, right? Like, you're asking people to come day in, day out, hustle and build something together. Like, they need to know why they're doing that and what is the greater impact and what is it that they're changing? Like, what is so that becomes the common thread throughout. But so in the very early days, hypothetically, right? Like, we had to do what I mentioned earlier. Like, we have to go to talk to customers, figure out the business model. Once we figured that out, we now had to figure out what to build. And so for the large part of the very early days at EatApp, we were camped at restaurants, literally camped at restaurants. We spent months and months and months just sitting there, standing behind the desks of the front of house and kind of observing the inefficiencies and just learning as much as we can, right? And so once we began to figure that out, then the engineering team kind of comes into this sort of a rhythm, and you can be replaced, right? As a founder, you can be replaced in that particular role. Okay, now that that's done, that cadence has to continue. Okay, what's next? Well, now we need to bring in a couple people. Then those people come in, and then you begin to train and work very closely with those individuals. And then as more individuals come in, those individuals can help kind of cascade that down. And in the background, you're managing, the customers that have come in, the people that have come in, and your shareholders, and you need more cash. So you're constantly fundraising. And the whole thing is so dynamic, right? Because like, now that we're fundraising, now we hear of other market opportunities. And so like for EatApp, for example, we went from setting up in Bahrain to quickly moving to Dubai. And that's kind of where I met David, my co-founder, who you know personally. And so I suppose the summary is, you need to do whatever it takes to become successful. You need to ensure the survival of the organization. Ultimately, that is your responsibility, right? Like, many things can go wrong. But if at that sort of death roadmap, like if you don't make it past, so you got to look back and what are the decisions that led to that. But ultimately, it's the founder's responsibility to assure survival. And so that's been, there's an eye on the ball on that throughout the whole 7 years. And yes, I'd say, maybe just to summarize, there's a lot of ideas here, but number one, assure everybody that they're working towards this great vision. Number two, you got to make sure the company stays alive throughout this whole time. So it's always funded. And man, there's been so many instances where like we make it so close to the finish line, but never have we skipped payroll ever, in the last 7 years, and no one has ever had to deal, and even in the pandemic, so that you have to take very hard decisions to ensure the survival of the org. And then third, I think you have to continue to build and be involved in things that no one else can at the time. And if you can be replaced, you got to get replaced instantly. And then you're on to the next thing and on to the next thing, while fundraising and managing shareholders and all these other stakeholders. So it's not an easy gig. Like it's, I'd say it's one of the hardest things anybody would have to put themselves into. But the reward is so remarkable because you look back and it's impressive what anybody can build as long as you set your eye on something. Anything is possible, right? And so the reward on a group and organizational level is to be extremely proud, right, of how far this organization has come. But also on a personal note, to know that like once an idea, later it becomes reality and anything is possible, right?
Yeah, and it's touching millions of people's lives.
Millions of people
think about.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And Soundscapes in many ways was that, right? Like, can we build a music festival? Can we be the first exported Arab music festival? Can we do that, right? Yeah, I think we can. Okay, well, what's the first step? So the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? You take the first step and then you kind of figure things out as you go. And anything is possible. As long as you have a vision and a will, there's a way, right? So that's kind of a summary of a founder's responsibility. It's so dynamic, right? The whole thing changes all the time. But you have to be the one that keeps your head up, right? Like in the pandemic, the world is burning. Like you have to be the only person that believes that the world will improve and things will get back to normal. No one else has a mindset, especially at times of difficulty. But you have to just keep your head up and keep going. And
right. I think to that point, by nature, as a founder, you have to be like deeply optimistic about the future. Otherwise, I don't think you'd even be in this position.
Right. You would never start. Right?
Yeah.
So then if you think about an idea like, okay, let's launch this company. Yeah, but what if it doesn't work? Or what if they don't buy it? Or
right.
What if I don't have the money? Or
ways it won't work.
Yeah. The odds are against you, right?
Absolutely.
Like statistically, 9 out of 10 companies will not make it. Period. Right. So why even bother to become the 1 out of 10? Right. And so you have to believe that whatever, fuck it, we'll do it. Like we'll try, and if it doesn't succeed, it would have been a good time. And we're happy with the outcome regardless. And yeah, it's kind of the analogy where we discussed about my dad. It's like, it's all a good time. Like we just got to keep moving forward, and whatever happens, and we keep a smile and we keep moving forward. It's such an important mindset to continue to believe in and remind yourself when times get tough that, you just gotta believe that it'll work out, and eventually everything works out, right? As long as you just keep at it and not give up.
Yeah, on having a good time, I had the pleasure of attending one of your Soundscapes events in Bahrain, and I was just blown away by the atmosphere, the music, like the energy, and so I had the pleasure of hosting your brother, Hussein. He episode 14 on the podcast, and he talked to us a bit about the early days, how like some of the crazy stories, how when you first started, I think the people at the entrance like just completely robbed, took all your money basically, and Like you guys were in debt, and like it's just crazy, crazy story. But yeah, amazing to see where you are today. Like having just organized an event in Zanzibar. Yeah, what was that like?
So I'd say there was a realization early on in the EatApp journey that it's so difficult to make time for people you love so much, right? As you know, like everything we just discussed, like that's a very, very hard task. It's a very demanding task. It's a very time-consuming task. And so the same friends that I was listening to those records from San Francisco, those friends, I'd kind of just began to lose touch because I'm so occupied with EatApp and the same thing with my brother. It's like I love him, and if I could, I'd spend so much time with them. And so one thing I realized was the best way to build meaningful relationship, maintain and spend time with the relationships that are dear to you, you got to find a common hobby, a common thread, a common topic, or a common project. And so to me, Soundscapes was an excuse to find a way to spend time with these people, because they're forced to do it. They're part of the project. They have responsibilities. They got to attend the meetings. They got to, and so looking back, a lot of these friendships could have fizzled away, just people get busy, people travel, people are based in different parts of the world. Like the founding team of Soundscapes, they're based in Saudi, Dubai, Bahrain, and elsewhere, right? So it's very difficult to ask of them to come and spend time together if there wasn't something that forced them to, right? So to me, Soundscapes was a platform to bring the people we love so dearly to spend time together. And so that was the beginning, right? And to this day, this remains the reason, right? Regardless of the financial, we get robbed, or there's a time also, I mentioned I went to jail once in this podcast. I'll say it again. I also went to jail again. This was in Bahrain, one of the other Soundscapes. Because of, Bahrain was, so Burning Man is where the vision was like heavily inspired by Burning Man. And so if you were to look up Soundscapes and you look at some of the creative elements, the art that we bring, it's so foreign to many people. And it's very radical, right? The things that we do are radical. And so, people came in and they're like, what the hell is this? I don't understand it. Who are the organizers? Who are the founding team? There's Nezar. Nezar goes to jail, right? So that happened. So it came with a lot of obstacles. It's funny, but it's true. So we realized that what we built, I think in Bahrain, like the test was, could this be, knowing the retention, like every Soundscapes had people, the same faces, right? So you do a Soundscapes, the next time the same faces come back +1, and then the second one, and so it was always full, right? It was always sold out. It was never a challenge to, and so then the objective was to say, look, like we're building something magical here. It seems like the community's, it's resonating very, very well with everyone. Is this just like a Bahrain thing, or could this product also be, could this resonate with people all over the world? And so the Zanzibar edition was to validate that, right? Back to the testing, like, could we validate that? And it was so beautiful, Fahad. Like the outcome was a magical 4 days on a beach, some of our favorite artists. And Soundscapes is also a platform that empowers local and regional artists. So we had unbelievable artists coming in from all over the region, female DJs from Saudi.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really impressive to see everybody bring their A game. And I realized I had like many epiphanies. And one of them was like, the region is home to unbelievable and incredible talent. Women that, were never provided a platform, right? These are women from Saudi. Like, who would have thought, crushing it, like, and we're all there on the dance floor with goosebumps, like, dude, where has this been, like, and so that was also a very interesting observation, and we are doing another one. We're going to continue to do Soundscapes. We're not stopping, and we're going to continue to calibrate the local talent compared to the international talent, and I think over the years we'll be fully regional acts.
As like the talent here evolves.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's already there. It's just untapped. There's no platform. This is the issue, is that there's no opportunity for them to come out with the right crowd, with the right sound system, with the right time to showcase their true abilities. But the region is home to some unbelievable people, right? And the more I live here, the more I'm in awe to meet so many incredible people, and I feel like Soundscapes should and will continue to support
right, and highlight like these people
for sure.
Yeah. Wow. How do you? I'm sure these people are they easy to find? How do you connect with these up and coming artists?
So all the Soundscapes founding team, all of us are music heads and DJs, right? And so just by being in the industry and just continuing to listen to music, keeping a close pulse, this is generally how we get informed of other artists. And then some of the members of the team are a lot more active DJs, and so they get to go and play different events. And at those events, you may come across another artist that plays before you or after you. And so it's just this constant discovery. And being Soundscapes, the people know the platform, so there's a lot of inbound, right? So we get a lot of inboxes, and I encourage anybody listening, if they are an artist, to just get in touch and share music. We listen to almost all the demos we get, and we get to discover artists that way too. There was a guy, really cool story, but there was a guy in Zanzibar. His artist name is C Note, and it was a cold inbound on Instagram, and he was very determined to like get us to listen to the music. And he didn't live in Zanzibar, he lived in the mainland, and he was like, where is the festival taking place? And we're like, it's here. And then like 2 days later, he flew in and he showed up at the thing. He's like, hey, I'm C Note. I'm like, dude, you're not based in Zanzibar? He's like, no, I just flew in, and I just determined to meet you guys. And then he shared his mixtape, and then we booked him, and he played, and so.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow. You mentioned that Burning Man was like an inspiration, and before we started recording, you're speaking about it with like a lot of enthusiasm and passion. Tell us more. Like, what does Burning Man mean to you?
Have you been?
I would love to go, but I haven't. Okay. I've heard so much about it, and my wife's been. A lot of close friends have been.
Okay, all right.
Hopefully, my turn is coming soon.
I'm sure we will facilitate that for you. It's really hard to talk about Burning Man because to the folks who've never been, the things I'm about to say will sound so foreign. But I'd like to maybe just focus on some high level lessons and ideas that I got to learn and observe throughout the year. So I've been going every single year since 2014. Like, I went the first time, and it was such a rich experience. And Soundscapes was kind of it was a piggyback, or rode the wave of Burning Man. And I haven't skipped a year until the pandemic, of course, couldn't travel, but haven't skipped a year. And to me, it was an experiment to try to find the purest thread of humanity. And so they said, okay, like, how do we get to the purest thread of humanity? Well, first of all, the whole material world sucks because it immediately creates a comparison between people. So there's zero material out there. There's no brands. There's none of that, right? Then not a single logo, right? And even the cars that do have logos, like, it's a cultural thing. You got to hide the logos, right? So you remove for 7 days out in the desert, no logos, right? So no material, nothing commercial. The second part is there's no money. No money's allowed, and there's nothing for sale. So all of a sudden, it creates another layer of something that you take for granted, that you think about money. What does this cost? You look at a menu and you compute and you think about money all the time. And so by removing that element entirely, it frees your brain from that. So no material, no money, and then there's no internet. There's no phones, right? Up until recently,
you're
I
off the
think.
grid.
Yeah, up until recently, they built a tower in a town nearby, and so maybe you'd get internet and somewhere, but no one uses their phone, right? And so once you remove these elements, you throw yourself in the desert, and there's a poster there of an art piece, and you invite the most incredible artists on the planet, and you build grants and art funds to bring the best artists in the world. And to the human brain, what happens if you remove all of these elements and all you do is expose yourself to art, and you bring these groups of people together in the desert for a week? The outcome of that on day 6 or 7 is like a life transforming event, right? And to many on the podcast, we're like, oh, but of course there's drugs and there's all these things. And there are those things, right? But you don't have to do any of those things. But you like, it is a social experiment to put yourself in that environment for a week, and you come out a different person, generally, because it enables people to become the purest form, and the people are so incredibly nice and creative and helpful, and everybody's kind of doing things for this one common goal. And I have never ever experienced, anything close to it, especially the community that it creates and the togetherfulness. And so within Soundscapes, we try to bring a lot of those elements, right? So we have art, we have music, we have community, and we have wellness, right? These are the 4 guiding pillars for Soundscapes. And you find the prevalence of that at Burning Man in many, many different instances. And so, I highly recommend to check it out. It's very hard to plan because it's really far, and tickets are sold out in seconds. And so you really have to want to go.
You have to be committed to the idea. Yeah.
But I certainly would love, and I know you'll enjoy it. So I'd love to help as much as I can to help you plan it and make sure that you.
Yeah, I can't wait. Hopefully this summer we'll try to make it happen. My wife, I think she started going a few years ago, and it's like she has to go, like religiously. Like, this is a yearly thing, and it just not negotiable. This is not negotiable.
I know that's the thing, and that's why it's so hard. Like, for people who don't know of it, like it's hard to comprehend. People kind of brush it off, which is fine because only 80,000, 90,000 people can go, right? I can tell you that they sell out in seconds, right? And so that means that there's hundreds of thousands of people who want to go, but only the lucky 90,000 or whatever get to make it. And the outcome of that is it's a life-changing experience. And so I understand her thinking. I'm on the same boat. I'd love to meet her now, actually, and chat to her about her experience.
Wow. Do you, is there room to kind of bring back that magic that you feel into your daily life or into your daily routine once you're back? Or do you feel like it's just something that's out of reach? It's just like, you need these elements to come together in a certain way, and then you get it.
Not at all. It's not designed to do that. So the idea of Burning Man is like, you come and you go through this extremely rich and compact experience, and then to walk away, and the impact of that, the residue of what you feel, is supposed to last you a lifetime, right? And so there are 10 guiding principles of Burning Man, and I encourage you to look at them. But there's so many elements, right? And so I'll give you a small example, right? Like, we come from the region. This is very unfortunate, but there's a term there called MOOP, matter out of place, right? So matter out of place is like, if you walk on a beach, and things that are out of place is plastic, right? That's matter out of place. It's not supposed to be there, right? And so MOOP is complete, like, you mentioned the word religious, like, it's religiously unaccepted to have any MOOP out there. So you just cement this idea that any move, anywhere you pick up, you clean, and we come from a region, like I remember in our childhood, people were throwing stuff out the car window or like.
I mean, to this day, I see it all the time.
I see it all the time, right? Like those guys need to go to Burning Man because like they need to get coached and taught, right? Or like, so that's like one thing. And there's like other extremely important elements. Like the fact that you don't have a phone there, right? Means that you can't communicate with anyone. So let's say I meet you, Fahad, and I'm Nezar, and we click, right? And the city's so big that the likelihood of me meeting you again is highly unlikely. So then what happens today? Like if I meet you today, we're like, cool, well, I gotta go, I'll text you later. And you don't really acknowledge the energy you have with people or at specific moments, and you get to postpone like living in the moment, right? Like it's so easy not to live in the moment. And so one of the other principles is like, you know, to live life by the moment and to take every opportunity as it exists, as if it would never happen again. And these are just, you know, 2 out of the 10 principles. So it all applies thereafter. And so, yeah, so it is a life-changing experience in the sense that you'll come out of that experience thinking about things you may have known, but it just like formalizes them and packages them into an experience. And yeah, it's been
wow.
Yeah, it's been an incredible experience, and that's in many ways the reason why we're doing Soundscapes is because we're trying to bring some of those elements back home, right? To try to bring people together. And I was so happy too at Zanzibar to see like the Moop idea. Like whenever there was, I don't know, something
That's
on the ground, people would pick it up and throw it in the garbage. And
that's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, I'd love to do the reverse podcast, and I'll talk to you after you go to Burning Man. That would be fun.
Let's do it. We'll do round 2. Wow. Can't wait to go. I mean, the way you talk about it, it sounds so exciting. Another topic I feel like I want to cover is maybe we can dive a bit deeper into cryptocurrency. You briefly touched that, and you started really early. I know you're really passionate about the space. I think you considered doing an ICO for EatApp a couple years back, like during the hype. And now, you know, obviously there's a lot of hype around NFTs. What are your thoughts about this space generally?
In general, I think that, you know, we have this close affinity and relationship with technology. We had spoken about San Francisco and kind of the Web 2 stuff we're doing now. And I think that, you know, anything that is pushing the boundaries of technology, we have to be very closely connected to. And as a result, like when I first heard of cryptocurrency, I heard of Bitcoin first. I mean, that was the main topic back in 2013, and then kind of the whole sort of ETH space kind of took shape. And then ICOs in 2017, and the whole it's been an incredible journey to see like so many use cases come to life. But I think it all makes sense. It all makes sense that this layer of the internet is being built. I think it makes sense to, you know, in like if we fast forward 50 years from now, right, 100 years from now, there's going to be many methods and infrastructures that will feel so orthodox then compared to now. And I think that the building blocks of blockchain, right, rather than looking at the end use case of Bitcoin or Ethereum or any protocol rather or use case, but like to look at the blockchain layer and to understand how we can take back control and how we create this direct relationship with one another. To me, that's perhaps the most fascinating. And as a result,
without going through like a middleman or a central.
Being able to build some sort of infrastructure layer that enables anybody to come in, whether it's coins or money or art or a contract or any asset, or like the fact that you have direct ownership and have the ability to transfer that ownership to anybody else. Like at the core, like the blockchain piece, I think that is the most disruptive piece of the entire sort of thread. And that's the common thread between everything, like from NFTs to Bitcoin to Ethereum. And so, that was the reason I was so excited about it. And I remember telling my dad, like, I came, when I first moved back, like, this was 2013, I went to have breakfast with my dad. I was like, Dad, listen to me. Like, there's a way that we can transfer money without a bank. Like, this is how, a blockchain works. This is how a wallet works. You have a secret key, a public key. Like, a public key is kind of like an IBAN. And he thought I was crazy. Like, I remember, and he had a friend come visit. My dad didn't think I was crazy. My dad was kind of like intrigued, like, okay, double click, and why don't you sleep on this and then come back tomorrow? And I'm like, Dad, I can't sleep on it. Like, can you imagine how disruptive this is? And his friend who was there thought I was crazy. But that's the whole idea. And we tried at EatApp to entertain ideas to introduce blockchain, but I think the use case that we have to this day doesn't necessarily fit in, and I didn't want to force it, right? Like, you can force the hype and do an ICO and raise a bunch of money, but I think that looking back, I'm glad we took a decision not to do that, despite maximize.
At the end of the day, serve your customers better, help you do that.
Right.
And if it doesn't, maybe shouldn't be a core part.
For sure.
Yeah.
But NFTs, amazing. Like, it makes total sense. Ethereum, incredible, right? Filecoin, Bitcoin, and there's many protocols and different infrastructures that I'm personally very excited about. But in general, I think it's important for anybody in the space or in technology just to take a closer look, and maybe like buy like a fraction of a Bitcoin just to like understand what a wallet is and like what a public address looks like. Okay, well, 0x means that it's an Ethereum address. Okay, well, it's good to know, right? And so, I highly encourage.
Find a place to store your 16-word recovery password.
Yeah. You got a Trezor?
Yeah.
You got a Trezor.
You recommended one, actually.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
the 16 phrase. Yeah, keep that secret somewhere. Yeah. I mean, you tell me like that. I mean, just going through the experience of buying a Trezor and maybe buying your first fraction of a Bitcoin, like the learning that comes out of just that small effort is incredible, right?
Absolutely. It's one thing to talk about it theoretically, but when you go through the process and actually make the exchange, sell some dollars, get some Bitcoin in exchange, it's there in your wallet. You're looking at it. Your friend makes a wallet, and you can actually move that money. And you're like, okay, this is real. This is happening.
Right. Yeah, it's real, and there's no central authority that's asking me to like do some KYC or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that like I own the Bitcoins and no one can take those Bitcoins away from me? How? Because that's really powerful, right? Or like I can go anywhere in the world, and as long as I have my secret keys, like, what does that mean? And so then it opens up a whole nother universe of ideas, right? And I think that's the most exciting part about it. And that's why I'd say like in 50 to 100 years, like, and also I think like Bitcoin is going to be like in 50 to 100 years. I think about that. I'm like, dude, like that's going to be ancient technology. That's so, because it's always going to be a finite amount of Bitcoins. And so I would encourage everybody to at least have maybe a couple, not a couple Bitcoin because that's really expensive now, but like.
But yeah, when you think about it that side, the upside is so ridiculously high.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
It's hard to imagine because it's hard to imagine 100 years from now, right? When like all the coins have been minted and mined, then what? Then it becomes this ancient thing, right? And so I'm excited about that, right? And so that's why I'm not selling, right? I want to gift that to my grandchildren and like
make sure they're set for life.
Yeah, basically. They'll probably sell. I don't know.
Do you?
I won't tell them the 16 digits.
Just in case. Do you think so? There's been a lot of criticism of Bitcoin in particular, Some people say transactions are slow. And it won't ever be feasible as a currency. How do you see it 100 years from now? Do you see it as a store of value? Do you think it can eventually evolve to fill that role? What do you see it becoming?
I think that you brushed on it, right? I think that every single infrastructure or protocol or project serves a very particular focus, right? I think that so we understand the blockchain layer, and then we look at all the different use cases, right? And I think that from a transaction use case, you'll have a protocol or infrastructure that serves that exact need, right? But I think that for Bitcoin is gold effectively, right? So gold is not a store of value that you chip away and use to buy, a burger with or an Uber with, etc. It's like, I have an asset that I want to store, and I am thinking about this asset long term. And for that purpose, it's by far this, out of all the different protocols, like it's by far the single most successful one, right? And it's proven it can hold its value regardless of external pressures, right? So I think that you have to look at every technology as where it sits within the ecosystem and what objective and problem it's trying to solve, right? And I think Bitcoin does the best job at that, right? Like you have a Bitcoin, you store it, no one else can steal it, right? No one else can take it away from you, and it's maturing and gaining value over time, right? It's literally gold, but in a numeric format, valued at whatever the market says it's valued, right? But then I also think about other protocols like, Filecoin or Ethereum, and they all solve for very particular, the problem space that they go after is very, very specific, right? And so for transactions, I don't think Bitcoin is I think store of gold is what it's for. And I think that for every single one of the, coins that we can talk about, they all try to pursue a specific use case. But it is slow, but it's okay. But like, go grab me the gold then from the car. Like, send me gold. I'm in Costa Rica. You're in Dubai. Give me gold. Like, I bet you that Bitcoin's going to be faster and it's going to be cheaper and it's divisible and it's instant and right. So yeah.
Amazing. We covered a lot of interesting topics. EatApp, that journey, Soundscapes. Actually, you know what? Before we kind of wrap things up, I want to ask you one thing, kind of about the startup world, or maybe the ecosystem.
Sure.
Your EatApp is one of few companies to come out of Bahrain or the region and to reach this level. Why do you think that's the case? And what can we do to continue to grow this ecosystem?
What was the reason EatApp achieved the goals and arrived at where it did now, and how could we do more of that? Great question.
Help other people replicate.
For sure.
What enable them to have this level of success more easily?
I think there's a lot there. There's a lot to talk about, but I will try to summarize in a few key areas that I think are extremely important. So the first is continue doing what you're doing, right? So you're funding companies, you're supporting founders by giving them fuel to build out their dreams. And I think the ecosystem continues to grow and mature at incredible speed. So comparing 2013, 2014, when we first started till now, like there were no, like now there are hundreds and hundreds of funds that are positioned to fund like early stage founders. So I think continue to do that, right? To continue to just sink dollars into the industry, fund founders, right? So like EatApp, the only reason EatApp is at where it's at today is because we've had fuel for the engine throughout the whole time, right? So the second is continue to seek, and this may sound cliche, but like continue to seek the best mentors and advisors as you can, and provide the founders with access to those guys. You sit on our board actually, and so coming across folks like Nate or Rick or and everybody else on the board, right? Hassan and Fawaz and everybody else, Pierre. The amount of lessons and strategy decisions that comes out of access to those guys. I mean, I don't say that lightly, right? Everybody says, yeah, you got to have a mentor, whatever. But like, how do you actually do that? How do you get a person like Rick to like spend time? And I feel like the founders that do succeed generally in the background, like, and it's invisible to the public, but they have these guys just giving them advice and so fund them, give them access to the best advisors and mentors you can give. The third is, I think you want to make sure that, like EatApp right now, as we sit here in the podcast, they have people grinding right now, like building tech, selling to restaurants, et cetera, right? So I think it's very important to like become founder friendly as an investor, and like to build a governance structure that provides resources, ESOP, good salaries, to enable founders to like hire the best people, right? Because that's really, really, really hard, right? To get somebody like David to hang out with us for 5 to 6 years, like it was obviously really fun to build EatApp and to partner together, but it's also the board provided stock options. The board provided support and like opened up, a position at the board to like, so like, how do you do more of that, right? And so how do you support founders to help them support their people? I would say there's many other elements, but if you fund, if you coach and you pay and provide support, you could continue to build mega unicorns moving forward. And we were fortunate to have had a lot of those things in our journey. And thanks to you guys, like, and your support. And, largely, if we didn't have the funding or didn't have access to these guys that taught us or didn't have access to like motivated people that wanted to continue building, like we wouldn't have come this far, right? And to say that EatApp is global, that's regardless, right? It's just like, you build a successful company, you will end up doing many different things. But I think if you have that infrastructure layer, then you can do anything actually. So there's a lot more on the list that I can talk about, but maybe those 3 things I would say are probably the ones that you want to.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I think being able to kind of witness different parts of your journey and seeing how like value people like Rick and Nate bring their ability to kind of hone down on very particular yet foundational aspects in minutes. It's incredible to watch, and it just shows like to what you were saying, like
for sure, like if they don't do it, who else would? And then we will be, those are blind spots in the road, right? So for sure. Or like somebody like Hassan to say, look, like, great, it's a great bullish business plan, but like, add 50% on top, right? Right. You need that. Founders need that, right? So it works.
Amazing. So towards the end of these episodes, I like to ask more just random questions. They're kind of a bit out there.
All right.
Try to answer with kind of whatever comes to your mind first. Some of them might be a bit difficult or unusual, but
all right, hit me.
Yeah, let's go through a few and try to wrap this up. What do you think enlightenment is?
It's epiphanies. It's like a vision of something real. Like you see it, crystal HD into the future.
What's an uncomfortable experience that you'd highly recommend to others?
Burning Man.
I had a feeling you're going to say that. What's something you strongly believe that you think most people would disagree with?
You can do anything, no matter what.
What is the most significant thing you've changed your mind about?
Oh, that's a big one. Having a kid.
Do you mind diving in a bit deeper there? Because I think that's interesting.
Sure. I was, the priorities in life had always I was constantly hungry to continue building and building and building, and I somehow saw the enlightenment. I saw a vision into the future, and I had a calling recently based on an experience that surprised me and shocked me. I'm not married or haven't settled down or anything along those lines. And I've had many opportunities in the past to do so, and kind of just continue to go after my dreams. And I think I will continue and always will do so. But, my business partner, he's about to give birth in a month. Pierre, who's also on our board, recently gave birth to his daughter. And I just, it changed me to see and become inspired by that. And I had a calling, and I was like, really, Nezar, you want to? So it shocked me to think about it. So yeah, it's definitely an idea that I'm entertaining that I just didn't think I would. Yeah.
Beautiful. A few more. What's your favorite memory? Is there something like that you, I don't know, find yourself replaying, gives you kind of inspiration, something that makes you happy?
I haven't thought of one, but now that you ask, we spoke about my dad, and it's a memory I will remember forever. It's after his first dip at the lake, and his face, it was his first time after the pandemic traveling, and it was in a forest, and he was drying his head. He's a bald head like me.
Like both of us.
And and so he, I think that's and it was this, it was blue skies and this couple of clouds and just this thick forest in Poland. And I think that's probably one of the most beautiful memories that at least wasn't top of mind. There's probably many others, but that one definitely makes it up there.
Last one. What excites you about the future?
That's a beautiful question. And maybe I'll give you a slightly longer answer. Sure. But I think that a friend of mine brought up this analogy recently, is that you earn dividends in life through many things. Dividends to people are, in most cases, it's a financial return. You invest in something and then it earns dividends. But there's another form of dividends, which is the dividends of memory, which is that if you have a beautiful experience, then every time you remember that memory, you're getting paid in dividends, in emotional happiness and just reflecting back, right? So life pays you dividends the more you continue building and the more experiences you continue pursuing. The thing that I'm most excited about in the future is the amount of dividends we're going to continue earning by constantly building a never-ending journey of creating these meaningful and deep experiences. And so I look forward to a life where this, we'll be rich in the dividends of memory. And so that's generally fuel and fire to continue to do things that make us uncomfortable, to go to Zanzibar and throw a festival in Africa. That's fucking hard, but knowing that after you do that, you'll have lifelong dividends of that memory. So that's something I'm excited about. And I look forward to creating more beautiful experiences.
That's beautiful. I think that's a lovely note to kind of wrap things up with. Do you feel like there's anything you want to add or mention that we didn't get to cover?
I think the whole time, I don't know if the camera is seeing this, but the whole time I've been talking, I've been reading this poster on the wall, and it resonates really strongly. And it says, difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. I think that's a great place to end. But I think, continue to pursue difficult things, continue to push yourself. Everything is achievable, even though many people disagree. I can't imagine the pushback we got about doing a festival in Africa. It's like, you're fucking crazy. Like, it's never going to work or whatever. So, just to continue to pursue things you find to be crazy. And I think that generally the destinations, right, they're very beautiful once you break through, and everything will work as long as you give it your full attention and energy. I think I live by that. I think it's a great sort of analogy and theory to like cement in your heart that leads you to do crazy things, but also beautiful things and great memories and dividends.
So nice. I wish you a future full of windy, steep, difficult roads.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Cheers, Fahad.
It's been a pleasure.